Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Am I Doing This Wrong? It's your gals, Morgan and Ryann, back for a new topic. How's it going, Ryann?
It's going well. Pretty good week. Yeah, I don't think I have anything to report. Oh, I actually might start with a new therapist soon, so that's kind of interesting.
Ooh,
See how that
okay.
goes. Me and Morgan were talking a while ago about doing like different types of therapy, and I've never just done like telehealth, like where you just like talk on the phone.
Mm,
Yeah, and so if I can't be in person yet, which depending on who I go with, I might be able to do in person. But if I can't, I was thinking like maybe, I don't know. I'm just going to try something new. So we'll see. But I also do want to see if I can start in-person therapy as well.
yeah.
Cuz I just feel like it feels different, you know. I don't know. What's your experience been? You've used telehealth, right?
Yeah, I've used majority of my therapy has been over telehealth.
Oh, okay.
Like mostly Zoom calls, but I have been in person as well.
Okay.
I I do enjoy both.
Okay.
I think I think I get the same thing out of both.
Oh, interesting.
Um,
Okay.
we didn't end up trying the walking, but we're gonna do that tomorrow. So this will be the first time we're trying an activity together
Mm,
outside of either, in person, in office or over, a Zoom call.
right.
So that'll be different. So we'll see
Yeah.
how that goes. It's
Oh,
gonna be hot.
interesting.
So
I know. Yeah. Also, yeah, you have to take into consider you also have to consider the weather as well. So,
yeah,
yeah.
that might be a factor. So I may or may not be doing that depending on what we decide because it's going to be warm.
Right, yeah. But something exciting that's happened is that we just recently passed 2,000 views for our podcast, or 2,000 listens technically on our podcast. So that's really exciting.
Woo! Thank you
I
guys
know.
so much. Such a
Yeah.
milestone for us, and we are so excited.
Yes.
And we can't wait to make more content for you guys. We hope you're getting something out of this because we just love it so much.
I know. It's super exciting. Yeah, looking at that and just being able to actually like put into numbers like how many people have tuned in. Our YouTube channel is starting to grow a bit and yeah, it's just exciting. So please just don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts because it really does help us and it also just gives us a sense of like where you guys are coming from, right? And like where our listeners are. And so, yeah, very exciting. Thank you so much for the support so far. So, I'm doing good. Yeah, I'm doing
Good.
good.
Yeah, good. Good,
Yeah,
good,
how are
good.
you?
I'm good as well, trying to practice my mindfulness that I mentioned last week.
You did.
So
Okay.
that's been good. Been journaling more, done
Hmm,
a little bit of meditation, some like affirmation things.
hmm.
So trying to stick with it.
Yeah.
It's not hard for me to start, it's hard for me to stick with. So just
Mm,
trying for consistency here.
yeah.
So that's what I'm working on. But I did have a
Yeah.
question though. So I got my nails done yesterday. This is not intense, believe me. It's kind of silly, but I just was wondering if it's just me. So so I got my nails done yesterday and I was gonna get a pedicure as well.
Hmm.
And then they were really busy. So I was like, I'll come back next week. We can do it then.
Hmm.
But it gives me a lot of anxiety to get a pedicure. Do you ever feel that way? Is it just me?
I would say, yeah, no. If anything, I'm pretty excited to get a pedicure. That's like more relaxing to me than getting my nails done. Like when I get my nails done, it's not that like relaxing because I feel like I'm just watching them do the whole process, even though,
Yeah. I'm
you know what I mean?
anticipating pain. Like I always feel because I'm pretty sensitive. Like my nails
Yes.
are thinner. And so when they like do the drill or something, I'm just like waiting for that moment where they like hit the skin or something. So that's true. I do have anxiety about that, but my feet are very ticklish. And so that really like stresses me out. I was watching
Mm.
as I'm getting my nails done, I'm watching this woman get a pedicure and they're just using like that cheese grater thing on her foot and she's just sitting there on her phone and I'm like, how is she doing this?
Yeah. So that's just like when I went with Ben. So Ben, my husband, like when we went to get pedicures, he doesn't have like that sensitivity in his feet. So he was just having a grand old time. He like fell asleep. And I was like, I can't fall asleep. Like, there's no
No,
way. Yeah.
no. I
Right.
barely let them do the pumice stone. Like I I give them 15 seconds maybe. But like
Yeah.
my feet, I don't have a lot of callus on my feet. So maybe that's why.
That's
You know, there's not a
surprising.
lot to get through it. Why? Because I always wear sandals. Because I
Yes.
barely
And
wear shoes.
yeah, exactly. Like, have your feet just like adapted and they don't have like buildup anymore or something? That's weird.
I don't know. I don't know why. I mean, I spend a lot of my time inside. So even though I'm barefoot,
Mm,
I'm mostly inside. And if I do go outside, not always, but I will probably wear um tennis shoes.
mm,
You know, I only wear my sandals if we're like doing something, but if I'm just like running errands, I usually will just throw on like some like workout pants and my, you know, tennis shoes.
mm. Okay. Well, also maybe some people are just more prone depending on like the way your feet are.
Right.
Yeah.
True. I do have pretty soft skin if I do say so myself.
That's true. She's a peach.
I
So.
am beach. So, okay, so it's just me. Okay,
Yeah.
great. So,
No, I mean,
I
in that way, I do have some anxiety. I do get what you're saying. It's not just totally like a layback. I mean, if the massage chairs are working well, because some of them are weird, they have like weird settings. But
Oh
if the
yeah.
massage chair is working appropriately, like I usually can relax for most of it.
Yeah.
But it's not like I can't ever really get like the deluxe version or whatever, of like the pedicure, just because, yeah, it's just a bunch of stuff that like I can't usually do. But I do
Hmm.
really like the hot towels. I
Yeah.
really enjoy that. That always feels really nice. But usually I just feel like these aren't things I really need. Like if I want to go to a spa, I'll just like go to a spa.
Right.
Yeah, it's a little
Right.
overdone.
Yeah, I just need my toes painted. I need
Yeah.
my nails clipped and my toes painted is really the issue.
Right. Yeah.
Everything else is secondary.
I'm sure you're not the only one, though. I feel like that's a common anxiety ridden situation for people that have sensitive feet. Like, that makes sense.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I've put it off another week, so I have something to dread this coming week until next Saturday. So,
Fair enough. Fair enough.
well, now that you guys have heard my anxiety-ridden upcoming appointment, I just wanted to check.
Well, yeah.
So,
Okay. Hold on, though, because I also want to say this. Okay. So, when Morgan gets her nails done, she always has like something in mind, for her nails to look like. But Morgan is very agreeable, we'll say that. Like, she's like, oh, it's fine.
that's like your
Like,
nice way of calling me a pushover. I could tell.
I was looking for a nice way to say it, but you're just very agreeable in that way. It's not always necessarily pushover, but you're just kind of like, no, that's good enough. But like,
Yeah.
whereas we have on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have Jose that's like, you see that little line that kind of like doesn't go straight. I want it to like not go straight, but like the other way. Like he makes everything
Yeah.
so convoluted and tough, which I don't, again, I feel like I might be a happy medium, but do you think that that's something that's common, especially when it's like your nails? Like your nails look fine. Like I'm not saying they look bad at all, but what you told me that you wanted and then you showed me them, I was like, okay, but that's like not exactly what you wanted. But is
Yeah.
that a thing? Like, does that cause anxiety to tell them like what to change? Or do you just feel like I said, like it's just an agreeable way of like, it's okay. It's not like they're ugly. It's just not exactly what you wanted.
Right. So when he started doing them, I was like, okay, that's not what I asked for specifically. But
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I kind of like it. Like I
Okay.
usually am kind of go with the flow. Like if it was
Okay.
really not what I wanted, I would say something for
Okay.
sure.
Okay.
Um, I also get impatient when I go to the nail salon. So
Mm.
sometimes it's hard for me to have like a nail appointment and like a pedicure appointment
Ooh,
because
yeah.
I'm like, I've been here for too long.
Yes.
Like
Okay.
I just get antsy. And
Yes.
so I'm like, just do whatever you got to do. I want to leave.
Right. Ooh, yeah.
So I think that's a part of it too. And
Fair.
then I think you're talking about the last time I got my nails done when I got the gel instead when I asked for acrylic.
Yeah.
So that time there were like three people who worked there who were telling me like don't do this, do that. And I had already been there for like an hour
Yeah.
that for them trying to get what I had on already off. And so I was
Mm,
just like, just do whatever gets me out of here as quickly as possible. So I
yes.
wasn't happy with what I got, but I needed my nails done because I was doing something that night and they just
Right.
looked like shit. They were like broken and there was, it was a mess. So I was like,
Yeah.
whatever you got is going to be better than what I have right now. So, so
Okay.
I think it's a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's fair. I am the same way. I don't understand how people have like 2.5 hour nail appointments. Like, that's why I usually don't go in with a design that I want, because
Yeah.
designs take longer. And
Yeah.
if you're going to a good nail shop, they're going to check in with you. Like, how do you like that? We can redo it. Let's wipe it off. And if it's like a special event, that I'm going to and I want like New Year's nails or,
Right.
Halloween nails, like, okay, I'm going to give the time. But honestly, yeah, if it's over like an hour 20, I get antsy. It's the same thing that happens at the dentist. Like, I don't want to sit in this chair for longer than necessary. And so
Right.
usually when I go, I do kind of get similar colors, similar nails, sparkle over, because at least I know it's going to be quick enough to where I'm like, oh yeah, that's a desired look. It looks good. I can leave. Like, I don't want to sit in this chair for an hour and a half and like go over like squiggly line patterns. Like, I don't want to do that.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I do like a fun pattern. I just
you do.
I do sometimes. Not over
Mm,
the top,
yeah.
but I mostly just like a colored tip.
That applies to more ways than one.
Speaking of, no, I'm just kidding. We are not going to segue off of that. Oh, but we should get on with it. The people
Sure.
have heard enough about our nail salon woes. So let's get into it, guys. So, first things first, we are not experts, we're not doctors, we're just two friends trying to figure it out.
Yes.
However,
Oh.
today's topic, Ryann might actually be a little bit more of an expert based on her dating history and current relationship. So, she
Ooh.
might be able to give us some insider knowledge.
Oh.
So, we'll see. We'll see because today we're talking about interracial relationships.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, all
Morgan's
right.
not an amateur herself, though. Don't let her fool you.
Oh, no, it's not interracial hookups and one night stands. I'd have a lot to say then. This
Oh,
is
okay.
interracial relationships.
Oh, interesting. Oh, okay. Ooh,
So,
then that might be like a part two or something, because yeah.
oh, yeah. I mean, if we want to compare, if we're going to go down the list, yeah, I'm happy to do. You guys let us know if you want a whole episode on that because we'd be happy to do it.
Fair,
We can
fair.
do a whole rating system, like.
Oh, love that. Love that.
All right. So we're not going to get too much into history. There's so much we could cover. But I do have a little section that I did want to bring up, and I call it history with a grain of salt because
Mm,
let's be real, the accuracy here is, we'll just say lacking, probably. So,
right.
you know, interracial marriage in the US has been legal throughout the US since at least 1967. The US Supreme Court decision Loving versus Wade held that anti-miscegenation, do you know that word?
Miscegenation.
Is it
Miscegenation.
miscegenation? Thank you.
Hmm.
Okay. Laws were unconstitutional via the 14th Amendment adopted in 1868. So, for those who don't know, anti miscegenation means to be against the interbreeding of people considered to be of different racial types.
Right.
So, Chief Justice Earl Warren wrote in the court opinion that the freedom to marry or not marry a person of another race resides with the individual and cannot be infringed by the state.
Mm.
The number of interracial marriages as a proportion of new marriages has been increasing from 3% in 1967 to 19% in 2019.
Mm.
The first interracial, quote unquote, marriage in what is today the United States was that of the woman commonly known as Pocahontas, who married tobacco planter John Rolfe in 1614. Again, this is why I say with a grain of salt, we're not quite sure. I'm
Yeah.
not quite sure. I didn't dig and dig and dig. So, the first ever law prohibiting interracial marriage was passed by the Maryland General Assembly in 1691. So that was prohibiting, the first law prohibiting. And then public approval of interracial marriage rose from 5% in 1950 to 94% in 2021.
Hmm.
So those are just some stats, some, little
Yeah.
history with a grain of salt.
Right. No, exactly. Because yeah, like the first interracial marriage on, like on record, right? That was
Right.
like, legal. But then also, just to keep it current, like there was just a House vote on interracial marriage, which is coming on the heels of, anti-abortion laws being passed. And this was just up for a vote, and almost all Republicans voted against um allowing interracial relationships in marriage. So again, like as much as these things are history with a grain of salt, like this is living history we're going through right now. And so, it's an interesting topic, and I'm super excited to get into like more of the discussion around it. But just know that like these things do still really affect our present day, because we are in a
Right,
wild time.
exactly. This is so current, and like
Yeah.
already with anti-abortion laws, like we can't go backwards. We can't go backwards. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like this
But
stuff seems so far from it, but then you gave a perfect example of how it's 100% still happening.
right. Yeah, exactly. So don't take your rights for granted, because there's a lot of people who know that, this can really have a serious effect on, it's not even necessarily have an effect on like the way that you have a relationship, but the way that your relationship is perceived, right, to the public and culture.
Mhm.
And that has a direct effect on the way that we see interracial relationships. And because they are becoming much more common. And yeah, like Morgan said, I mean, going backwards is bad, and we should not do that.
Yes.
So, yeah, let's get into it.
Yes. So, all right. So I found an article in the New York Times, and it was called "Do You Hide Your True Self While Dating?"
Ooh.
Okay. So to pull out some points, it says when dating interracially, some Black people say that code switching, a common practice of adapting the way they look, speak, or act in different social settings, comes as second nature.
Mm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So,
Yep, I
first
concur.
example, huh?
I said, yep, I concur.
I was going to ask, do you feel like that's a true statement?
Oh, for sure. I do think as like dating apps evolve a little bit, I think it's a little bit easier, or it should be easier to like show up as your true self. However, I do know people that have been on, dates, interracial dates, and on the apps, and we'll get into it a little bit later. But yes, code switching. I mean, code switching is just the way that most Black people, especially in America, like just move through their lives. Like we are very used to having to appease the white majority. And so whether that's, making sure that you end your words a certain way, or don't use certain slang around like the people that are, in your workplace, or in, like social settings and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's a very common act that you honestly learn from, the time like you're a child in school. So it's no surprise that it happens in dating as well. But I'll have more to say on that in a bit.
Okay. Yeah. So I had a couple examples that they gave in the article. So the first one, it's a Black woman. She went on a first date with a white guy, a tax attorney in Washington, D.C. And she arrived wearing box braids that concealed her natural afro. 6 months would pass before she would let this guy, who turned into her significant other, see her with natural hair. She goes on to say that hair isn't the only thing that she toned down when getting to know someone who is not Black. She won't play soul music, wear clothes that don't expose her curves, and avoids using African American vernacular English.
Yeah.
So basically, what Ryann was just saying.
Right. However, I do think there's something to be said about internalized like white supremacy, and like allowing these things to affect the way that you date. Like for myself, and obviously I can only speak from my own experience, but for myself and other people that I've met in interracial relationships, the difference between showing up as your full self and like a quote unquote like watered down or code switched version of yourself is honestly up to you. Like, I think it goes the same for like showing up, to an interview with your natural hair versus, in a straight style that looks more like the westernized version of what we think professional looks like. Or yeah, not using slang and things like that. Everyone to a certain extent does it for job interviews because you do want to
Sure.
present the most professional, quote unquote, looking version of yourself. And then when you get the job, maybe you will dye your hair or wear it in a top bun or, do things
Yeah.
that maybe you wouldn't do on a date or, I'm sorry, on a first date or, in first interview. But at the same time, I do think there's something that's very important is that we have to recognize the fact that, like, he didn't necessarily tell you to show up to a date with box braids concealing your natural hair, right? He wasn't like, oh, wow, I'm really glad that, you wore box braids instead of your
Right.
natural hair. You know what I mean? And I understand where she's coming from with that thought. Like, I have definitely dated people in the past that I felt like I needed to straighten my hair before I went to see them or something like that.
Hmm.
But I've also done that for black guys that I've dated as well, just because, again, we all have some form of like internalized white supremacy and misogyny. And our typical dating culture, especially in the early thousands, tells us that like straight hair and thin bodies and, like tan skin, but not too tan, right, is
Right.
acceptable. And that's what you should look like, right? Like, I think some of these things can also apply across the board. I know a lot of women that won't not wear makeup in front of their significant others for months and years on end. I mean, some people just don't think that they'll ever do it. And
Yeah.
for me, that's like unheard of, right? Like, I'm sure you've understood and experienced this as well, which it's just like, again, I don't think that necessarily the guy is putting those values on you. Sometimes they are. I've heard guys say, like, no, I don't need to
It
see
happens.
your
Yeah,
makeup.
it happens.
Right.
Yes.
Right. But I do think we need to like take ownership of the fact that like if you are going into like interracial dating situations, you need to recognize that if you're not showing up as your full self, yes, it will be a shock to that person 6 months down the line when they see your hair look completely different. But again, like you kind of set yourself up for this. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying like we need to take ownership of the fact that like showing up as your full self is completely a you choice, right?
Mhm.
And whether or not they accept it, that's then their choice to put those
Right.
values on you. Yeah.
Right. Ooh,
Yeah.
well said. Well said. So she goes on to say that she also wore her Birkenstocks on the first date. And she said, which I would never wear on a first date with a non-white man. And I was like, come on, white people.
Wait,
We
first
are
of
so
all,
stern. I know. I
where was
was like,
their
why are
first
we
date?
I don't think it said. I don't think it said. I don't know.
That's
I was like,
hilarious.
are you at Burning Man? Like, what are you guys doing? Why do you have to wear your Birkenstocks? Is he such so typical a white guy that he's like, meet me at REI and then we'll like I like what are we doing?
That's hilarious, just in general for a first date.
Yeah, I was like, that's a specific choice for
That
any first
is.
date.
Yeah. And if you have a set of Birkenstocks that are just like ready, to go and you're like, "Oh, these could go for a first date." I don't know if that's like a interracial dating choice. That just seems like again, like a you choice. Um
Right. Like maybe you're making bigger stretches and assumptions about him at that point if you're gonna like I have to wear my Birkenstocks on this first date because he's white.
Right, yeah, he probably showed up in like Nikes or something.
Right. So, the alteration of hairstyle, clothes, and interests in order to gain social acceptance and limit the risk of falling victim to bias is a form of code switching, a term that refers to the common practice of adapting or altering speech, dialect, look, or behavior depending on the social setting, like we
Mm,
said. So that was our first example. So our next example from the article was a journalist and illustrator who also lives in DC. He says it wasn't until a white boyfriend confronted him about his change in vernacular that he realized he altered his speech. He says he mostly dates white guys and later realized he code switches in other ways when meeting someone who isn't black for the first time. He says, quote, when I'm going on a first date, I consciously put on clothes that make me appear to be a Don Lemon type instead of a 50 Cent type, even though I have both types of clothing.
uh Oh, yeah. I mean, I think this falls into like, is it preference or prejudice? again, it's just like that internalized like misogyny, or, misogynoir, which is like the intersection of misogyny and white supremacy, where like you're kind of thinking that these things will get you into the desired places that you want to be. And it's a fine line. Like, I know people that do that and are in interracial relationships because they want that sense of like higher status or whatever. But at the
Mm,
same time, like, you're gambling this kind of like, dual identity thing, which, like, again, don't get me wrong, it's not whether it's like right or wrong. It's just like something you need to be cognizant of. And yeah, I think it goes for a lot of different things. Like I said, I know a lot of women that do similar things. They'll dress very conservatively because that's what they think that, like, whoever they're attracting wants, or they'll dress a lot more, sexy and, whatever, showing more skin because that might be what they think attracts men. But again, it's just showing up as yourself. Like, this person didn't even know that that was something that they did consciously. And I don't know, it's also just like lack of self-awareness. Like, I think that's the biggest thing when it comes to online dating. Like, I know that what I was putting out on my profile, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, when I first started getting on dating apps, is not what I wanted. I was attracting things that I didn't want from,
yeah.
different types of guys. And then I met up with them. And coincidentally, they were all assholes and very egotistical and very misogynist. And like, I had to realize, like, oh, it's because of what I'm putting out there. And I'm not saying you need to change it. I'm just saying be aware of what it is, what your persona is coming off like, because is that something that you actually want to attract, or is that what you think will attract guys to you? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
So,
We've talked a lot about what to put on your dating profile. I feel like every episode we kind
yeah,
of, not every episode, but you know
right.
what I mean? But that's
Yeah.
true. It's true. I'm not on the apps. I didn't really like them, but I feel like if I went back to them, I probably have a better sense of what I should be putting on there.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's like, put your best foot forward, that's fine. It's just that, like, in our present day, like, especially like social media and people really caring about their image, like, like I mentioned, like, so many people having their Instagram or social medias tagged in their dating profiles. Like, is this because you want me to actually have a glimpse into your life, or is this because you want me to see a certain image of yourself, right? Like,
Right. Instagram is not real life either.
right, exactly. It's real in terms of like social media, right? Like,
Right. It's
but
your
it's
digital persona, but it's not who you really are. I mean,
right,
see our comfort, see last episode,
right.
because everyone has problems, everyone has shit. And not that you need to put all your shit out there because you're trying to like date and meet someone. Obviously, you don't lead with your baggage. But
Right, yeah, exactly. But no, that's true. Like, there are certain types of people that feel okay with code switching, not just, in terms of Black people for, white audiences, but there are people that feel okay in terms of like changing their persona or their personality depending on who they're around. Um, but you just have to know if that's you or not. Like, I know some couples that I'm like, yeah, you act totally different around certain groups of people. But if you two are both kind of on the same page about that in a weird way, like, if that works for you, I guess that works for you. But it has to like be something that you're actually like willing to admit. And I think
yeah,
when you start getting into like, oh no, that's just like the way I do this, or oh no, I just happen to wear my hair straight around this amount, this type of people, it's like, I mean, okay, but there's like a lot of history that shows that like you probably do that for like internalized reasons that maybe you're not unpacking yet.
right.
Um, but I will say I have been on a date. I have been on it, or I went on a date with a white guy. This was like, I think in like 2015, 2016, something like that. And yeah, I've been wearing my hair natural for a really long time. So, I showed up on that date just like I would any other date. And we were talking about something, and I was just saying how like I had like recently cut my hair or something like that. And he was like, oh, like shorter than what you have it now. And I was just like, I mean, yeah, obviously, because I cut it. So what cutting hair means. And I do remember thinking like, oh, it's because you're used to like the traditional westernized view on what hair is supposed to look like, which is straight and long, right?
Right.
And for me, that was a red flag because I was like, oh, clearly you don't have any experience with dating women of color. So like, I'm not going to be your guide into like what my hair is going to look like in the morning, or why I need to go to a curly cut specialist instead of just going to like Supercuts or something to get my trim. Like, I don't want to be that guide for you, but at the same time, like dating someone and like starting to get into a real relationship is about teaching teaching each other about yourselves past the dating realm, right? Like,
Right.
and so that's why it's like, as much as some things are very specific for interracial dating, there's also things that just go across the board that I think people overlook in general. Because in my experience, dating people in any different types of like identities outside of what I am, I need to be like aware that they have something to teach me as well. And so I think a lot of times, like for interracial dates, we expect that like, oh, the person of color is going to have a lot to teach the other person, right? Or like the standard, which is, or, which is like white people, right? But like in reality, like white people are not a monolith either, And like, it's not okay to assume that they're just going to come with like unseasoned chicken and like, walnuts and raisins in their potato salad and be like, oh, like I
In
just
their
don't have any.
Birkenstocks. Yeah.
Right. And Birkenstocks. Right. Exactly. Like, I think it goes both ways, but a lot
Yeah.
of times, but I understand people where they're coming from when they say these things about code switching, but I do think it's something that can happen just as easily with, going out on a date with like someone that identifies as a feminist, right? Or someone that identifies as non-binary. Like, they're going to have to like delve into these conversations just as much. And again, it's just the self-awareness piece that I keep like going back to, because I don't think interracial dating is as taboo as it used to be. Like, but you need to have a certain amount of self-awareness about yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. Well, let's talk about that a little bit. So it goes on to say, while a person of any race may adapt their authentic self to make a good impression on a date, this switch in behavior is often more prominent in interracial or interethnic relationships.
Yeah.
But I think based on what you were saying, that's totally true. It could be based on anything that this other person identifies as.
Right.
You're
Right.
probably not going to know everything about who they are and what they do and why they do it.
Mm-hmm.
So just having that awareness to learn
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
is key.
Yeah, exactly. Because yeah, just like I actually remember somebody that I met in college who I didn't meet through a dating app, but we met in person. I remember him saying something to the effect that like, he grew up really poor and people always assumed because he was living in LA as a white guy that like he came from money and that he came from like a wholesome family. And I remember back then like totally judging him and being like, oh, how horrible that people like assume that you have money. But like in a lot of ways that can actually be really detrimental, right? Like inviting you on dates, inviting you to parties, expecting you to be able to like go on trips and do things. And it's not to say that that struggle is like, worse than something else, but at the same time, like just having those assumptions about any community is like not going to like serve you, because it's not going to be like, you're kind of like creating this expectation of what you want to date in your mind. And you're like putting that on every single person that you think falls into that category. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I think for me, like the biggest thing, especially growing up, from a Black family, like, dating outside of, your own ethnic group is a little bit considered taboo still, even now, like, people still have their like opinions about it. But I do think it just depends on the type of person you are. Because as Morgan knows, like nobody was ever surprised that I was like dating a white guy and ended up like marrying a white guy. Like that wasn't a surprise to anyone in my family. But I do think for me, like it wasn't necessarily surprising, but it was just like I had a long like self-actualization journey that I had to realize like I have never dated anyone because of what I perceived they would like add to my life. Like I've never dated anyone where I was like, oh, this is like what my family would want my life to look like. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because that just never did anything for me. And so now being married to a white man and having like, white in-laws, it's just kind of adding to like the trajectory that like my life is going to look like what it looks like for me. And it's probably not going to fit into anyone else's expectations. And that's fine.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
Yay. Snaps for Ryann. So, Sean Boodram, a Los Angeles based sex and relationship educator who is Black, Indian, and white, said many Black Americans see code switching as an obligation rather than a choice. They say that code switching is speaking specifically to Black people who have to assimilate or feel that they have to assimilate to white culture in order to receive success.
Mm,
So kind of different from how you feel, so that's good.
mhm,
Um, so she goes on to say this is including a romantic potential in somebody who is white.
mm,
Black women in particular resort to code switching when dating because of the bias they often face, a result of being stereotyped as angry and discontented, hypersexualized, and lacking positive representation in TV and film. This bias has led to Black women being the least contacted on dating apps and facing the most racial and sexual discrimination in online dating settings.
mhm, mhm,
So while code switching might be the thing that gets someone a second date, those who acknowledge it, no, those who acknowledge doing it said it wasn't a long-term strategy.
mm.
And
Interesting.
both of our examples, both of our people that we talked about, the Birkenstocks and Don Lemon versus 50 Cent, they both said at the end of the article that it was something that they are trying to acknowledge and not, you know, to show up as their more authentic self when they are dating.
Mhm. Yeah. No,
So
exactly.
basically, all the things you were saying about self awareness, they both did acknowledge that at the end of the article.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And like I do also think it's super interesting when I meet couples of the same ethnic background, like let's just for instance say like, a black couple where, when they were dating, they were like, "Oh no, I was only looking for like, black guys or I was only looking for this." And I'm like, that's super interesting. Like that's one way to go about dating. I get it. If you don't want to or if you feel as though you don't want to have other issues to add to your relationship, I can see how people think like, well, if I just date someone with similar backgrounds as it would just be easier, right? And I mean, maybe it is easier. I haven't experienced that. I have experienced, discrimination and over sexualization from black men just as I've received it from any other type of man. And that is true, like black women being like the least desirable on dating apps as far as statistics go, while also Asian men being among the most least desirable men on
Hmm.
dating apps as well. Um, but you know what I mean? But like that's just something that again, that is a fact, right? Like especially when you're talking about dating apps. But I don't think that that is to say that you need to change anything about yourself to try and make yourself more desirable. And I think it's interesting those examples were from DC because I actually just recently watched like some trash reality television about DC dating, like the DC dating
Yeah.
area. And a lot of these people that were on this show, I mean, again, it's reality TV, so like, what do you expect? But also, too, like, I do think there's something to be said about it in comparison to like other seasons that were in other areas of the country. Like again, it's all about presentation, right? DC is all about like what you do, who you know, how you present yourself. Remember, first impressions are super important, blah blah blah. And like, okay, to a certain extent that's all true, but like again, if you're presenting yourself as someone that's like, I'm perfect and I'm just ready to get in a relationship with another person that's like fully ready to do all the things, it's like, okay, but you're already discounting like what a relationship is anyway, right? Like it's work. You're going to
Right.
have to compromise. Nothing that you present is perfect. And if you're going into the dating realm feeling like, well, I have all my shit together, quote unquote, I just need to meet somebody else who has all their shit together, I can guarantee that you're probably not going to have something that is long lasting or that's about more than just the superficialities of like what it looks like to be together,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Well said.
Yeah.
So, question for you. Do you have any examples of specific hardships that you and Ben have faced?
Ooh, that's a good
Like,
question.
is there something that's like, could you give us an off the top of your head example?
um, so I'd
Specifically because he's white and you're black.
right. So I would say this is this is a very common situation to happen in black families when you're bringing someone outside of that ethnic group. Um is just like, oh, does he know how to dance? Like, does he know how to cook? Does he know how to, behave, in like social settings? because again, like just culturally, like the way that white people have like cultural gatherings versus the way that like Black people, and we're just talking about very stereotypical, have gatherings, it's very different. It looks very different. And I know this from growing up in a predominantly white area. Like usually there's not a lot of music at white events, and if it is, it's like very quiet.
Yeah.
So seriously, and so that was something that I was used to growing up. Like I was like, yeah, like white people don't really dance like that, and if they do, it's because they're really drunk and like they just want to like dance at the end of the night. So that was just something that I had learned, like from like going to weddings and stuff. Music isn't really the focal point. Whereas at Black events, music is the focal point. That is the way that you get everybody dancing and meeting and greeting. Like, you know, that is like a very important part of like the cultural aspect when you go to these events. And I can say the same for other groups of color as well. Like music tends to be like a focal point. That's culture. That's like sharing with you like memories and, oh, this was the song that we played when we went to blah, blah, blah. Right. You know, it's like it has a lot of like cultural attachment. And so, yeah, like when Ben started coming around for the first times, it was like, oh, can Ben groove? Like, can he like keep up? Da da da. And he can, like, I'll just say he can hold his own. But at the same time, for me, I was like, yeah, but like that was important to me because Morgan knows, like, I love to dance. I love to be on the
She
dance
does.
floor.
She does. Put a dance floor in front of Ryann. She won't get off.
I won't get off. Exactly. But I also know a lot of Black people that are not like that do not like to dance in front of people. And so I think that that's like a cultural trope, you know, a stereotypical trope of Black events that people are like, oh, like if he doesn't know how to dance, he can't hang. He's not going to be able to like hang out at like family events. When like in reality, that's not necessarily true. But for me, genuinely as a person, I could not be with somebody who wasn't comfortable like dancing or at least letting me have my good time, you know, because like,
right.
Nobody's going to put baby in the corner kind of thing.
Right. True. So this is more of a personal preference at this point. That's
exactly.
true.
But that
That's
was
true.
for me, you know,
Yes.
but that was a common one. But when I went to visit his family, I will say that like I can't really think of anything super specific. Oh, but I do remember, super funny, his niece asked me one of the first times we spent a holiday together if it was true that Black people have their own happy birthday song. And, you know, and it's like a room full of white people. And I'm like, well, as the spokesperson of all Black people, you know, but that was like something that obviously she doesn't have a lot of experience around people of color, especially Black people growing up where she grows up. And you have to be ready for like those kind of awkward situations. And, you know, and like I told her, I was like, I mean, honestly, yes, we actually do have like a separate happy birthday song. And it typically is used by Black people, you know, it's by Stevie Wonder, like, you know, and so I'm like telling her about it. And that was kind of like a learning experience for all of us, right? I think after she said it, she kind of realized like, I don't know if I should be asking her, you know, but at the same time, like for me, I'm like, I'm used to it because I know that I grew up in situations where Black or white people kind of said offhand comments all the time. Like, oh yeah, you'll love this. Like it's a dance song. Or like, oh, you know, you'll be able to do this. It's about rhythm, you know, da da da. And I'm like, okay. I mean, you just kind of like assumed that for me. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, but some things do stick. So, but again, it's like those types of things, again, I think could happen across many different situations, but it is kind of put on a spotlight when it's white and Black, because especially in this country, there's a lot of chasm when it's those two, you know? So there are experiences, but at the same time, like I said, like nobody in my family was surprised that I ended up with somebody white. But I do think there's something to be said that when I was dating, I was not looking for any specific type of person. I was just looking for people who didn't put expectations on me. Because like I said, that came from a myriad of men, you know, like, oh, do you wear your hair like nappy? And I've heard that from Black men just as I've heard that from any type of man, you know, or, oh, like, do you dress a certain way, blah, blah, blah. And that came from all kinds of men, white men, Black men, any men included. So for me, it was more so like meeting a guy that wasn't like married to his masculinity, right? It was, you know, meeting a guy that wasn't quote unquote okay with gay people. No, he was like accepting and like understood that this is just other people just like you, and they have different preferences and life goals just like you. And so that was way more important to me, you know, because meeting toxic masculine men is way more prevalent than people try to talk about. You know, it's like you can find someone within your same ethnic group that is, you know, just as toxic as anybody else. And for me, like that was more important than meeting somebody that was of a certain skin color, you know?
Right. Fair. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about some other hardships in interracial dating, and you can let us know. if any of these apply or you agree. But this is more generalized, so we're going to kind of go through. So, the Mixed Up Love, oh, nope. The Mixed Up in Love report, released from dating app Inner Circle in collaboration with authors of Mixed Up Confessions of an Interracial Relationship, surveyed over 1,000 UK adults actively dating with a minimum of 100 respondents in the ethnic groups Asian, Black, Mixed, White British, and White Other, and found that over a third, 37%, of the respondents have experienced racial microaggressions or discriminations due to being a part of interracial relationships. So, respondents most commonly cited fearing backlash or critical responses from those closest to them, their friends and family, 49%, as well as negative reactions and behaviors from colleagues, 34%, while interracially dating. Have you experienced anything from colleagues?
Oh yeah.
Really? Okay. I mean,
Yeah,
you kind of your work schedule isn't like the typical 9 to 5. So,
right.
you see a lot of different people throughout the day. So I don't really know how
True.
many people know about your personal life or your relationship like that.
Right, that's true. And that the interesting part about that is because yeah, I'm in so many different spaces. Like I've said this before to Morgan in conversation. Like people really assume your identity for you when you show up. When I show up with
Mm.
a ring, they assume that I'm straight. When I show up in
Oh.
women's clothing, they assume that I'm feminine presenting woman. Like all of these things are kind of assumed for me because of what they see my appearance as, and so yeah, like I've had colleagues, whether, they're the client or otherwise, say things about interracial dating, say things about gay people, say things about trans people. Like I've heard people say things in my presence, and sometimes I choose to like check them and be like, yeah, well, I'm queer. So like, I don't really subscribe to that, and I'll kind of just call it out. Or sometimes I just kind of let them dig that hole and see like how
Mm,
far it goes. You know what I mean?
yeah.
I think the same can be said for like white people, when you show up and there's things said about black people or said about other ethnic groups, like sometimes you can engage with it and sometimes you're like, how far is this really going to go? Like, how much will you really say before you realize that maybe, just maybe, those type of people are in my life, and or I'm not okay with what you're saying, right? Like Morgan's
Yeah.
nodding her head if you're not watching on YouTube. Like I think most people realize that like what you see is not always what you get, but there are so many people that are willing to put their foot well down their throat to say what they think about group X before they even acknowledge that you could be a part of that group or have ties to that group or just not agree with them, right?
Right. 1000%. Oh my gosh. The liberty people will take to say something without just because you don't see that exact thing that you're talking about
Mm-hmm.
maybe in front of you, maybe.
Yeah.
But you don't know these people. That's a really good point.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is wild. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. There's some there
Yeah.
yes, I can think of a few also where people say
Right?
something and I'm like, you
Yeah.
don't know anything. Like, why would you assume that I would agree with you about that?
Right. Exactly. It's a huge assumption on their part.
Yeah.
But it tells you a lot about people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had people say like, oh yeah, like interracial dating, I don't, some form of like, I don't understand it, or it could never be me, which it could
Mhm.
never be me is a little bit more understandable because I'm like, okay, I mean, that's fine. I'm not wanting you to marry my husband either. So I guess we're good on that front. Uh,
Right.
you know what I mean? But at the same time, but then I might poke and prod a bit like, oh, like why, like what is it? Why does it bother you so much, right? I can give you a great example. Just the other night, me and Ben got into a lift. We were like going somewhere before we went to a show in DC, and we get in, and this guy, the driver, just goes off on a whole rant about how he doesn't understand how he understands gay people. Like, don't get me wrong, I understand gay people, but like, you're not a woman, like just because you would put on woman's clothes and da da da. I mean, he goes on a full rant. I'm not kidding, like full rant. He brings in his religion into it, of course.
Mm.
And I'm like just like haha, like looking over at Ben, just like how far will this go? And it went pretty far, let me tell you. You know what I mean? but we're just sitting there like, but in that situation, it's kind of tough because it's like, one, you're about to rape me when I get out of this car. And like, I need Lyft all the time. So like, I can't have you like giving me a bad review, but also
Yeah.
too, like, it is interesting to see like how far people will really go. And he really went there, it was just like, and I think he kind of like gauged by our silence that we were, at least if not in agreement, we were just like indifferent to what he was talking about.
Right. We're not going to engage. Like
Right,
he's
exactly.
looking for like a yeah,
Some type of
like an
signal.
audience, like yeah, like a you know, you're on
Yeah.
my side, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. And and so it was super interesting because for us, we're just like sitting there like, okay, well, again, you know nothing about us. This is wild and this could be crazy triggering. And you could also just get yourself into a sticky situation saying shit like that, like,
Right, to complete strangers. What are you doing?
yeah, exactly.
Right.
So,
This is the assumptions people are making, saying things in front of people. Like,
yeah. Yeah,
so weird.
I know.
So no self-awareness.
Yes, exactly. It's the
Lack of
lack of
self-awareness.
self-awareness for me. Yes.
Okay. So so other problems were no. So other problems cited were as common as prejudice coming from a partner in an interracial relationship and the cultural and racial differences between partners leading to misunderstanding, miscommunication, and not being on the same page about issues like dealing with extended family or parenting.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And it's super interesting too because, Ben's family, I think a lot of times like what I've observed of white culture or, lack of, I don't even know what you call it, but white people in America. What I've observed is that like a lot of times their families tend to be a lot more individualistic. Where like once you leave the house, you take care of yourself and like that's it. You go start your own family. Sometimes they'll spend holidays together, sometimes they won't. Like it's not really an obligation. It's not obligatory. Whereas in a lot of people of color and their families and their ethnic backgrounds, like family is everything. You do whatever you can for the people in your family, even to your own detriment, right? Like I've seen this happen time and time again. But I think what's super interesting is that we have had chasms and like situations come up, Morgan knows,
Mm.
because of, the strong ties that I have with my family. And sometimes those obligations like bleeding into my personal life and my relationship with my husband. Um, but I do think that there's something to be said that like that's not necessarily always the norm. I mean, me and Morgan's family probably have a lot more in common than Morgan and Ben's family, right? And they both
Right.
come from like as far as culture goes, like a white family in America. And so I think it's super interesting because a lot of times it's not so much about the ethnicity or the color of their skin. It's more just like where they grew up and what values they espoused while growing up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. 1000%. So, okay. Over a third of the respondents have experienced racial fetishization. Fetishization.
Yeah.
The act of making someone an object of sexual desire based on an aspect of their racial identity. Of these, Asian daters have experienced this the most at 56%, followed by Black Caribbean at 50%.
Mm, yeah.
So, despite the oh, I'm sorry, were you going to say something?
Mm-mm.
Okay. Despite these statistics, the report found willingness to talk about racism and interracial dating remains low. So just 4 of the 10 respondents, which is about 43%, would start a serious conversation about race once they had witnessed their partner experience racism firsthand.
Interesting.
Right. So less willingness to talk about or acknowledge it.
Mm. Yeah, I saw a lot of this happen in like 2020, right? When
Mm,
like after COVID hit and then, the seriously brutal murder of George Floyd on video, that honestly went viral and just kind of shocked the world. There were a very large majority of Black people being like, this is nothing new. It's horrible to see, but this is nothing new. But there were a lot of Black people that do not live in inner city areas or do not live amongst the majority of Black people that live in impoverished cities and, areas of this country that were also surprised. So I won't say that it was just a monolith of every Black person being like, yeah, we know, we get it, because it wasn't. That's not true. But I do remember there was a lot of discourse around interracial relationships being kind of split wide open and realizing that like, wow, you don't know a lot about my upbringing, whether that person that was in the relationship who was Black was, just kind of like compartmentalizing that portion of their life and choosing to ignore it. I'm not saying everyone needs to take on the brunt of, the plight of Black people in this country. It's not fair in that way. However, I will say that I was very surprised at how many interracial relationships, couples came out on social media explaining how they didn't know that like this was the reality and they were going to have like, mixed babies, and they couldn't believe that like this was something that their kids would like take on as like their plight. And I was just like, I mean, again, right? Like it's just like when you live in a bubble and that bubble is burst because of like society and what's going on. I mean, to me that makes no sense, but also there are always going to be struggles that you don't know about each other until they come up. Like that's just the nature of relationships. You can't like show everyone or show everything to your partner all at once, right? When you're dating, it's not that. But it is a little bit shocking to me that you've been in a relationship with someone that obviously isn't from your same ethnic group or cultural background, and you don't know anything about the struggles that come along with that. I think early on in me and Ben's relationship, like we talked about that pretty heavily, like, and we were meaning to make it something long term. And so, telling me about his upbringing, he did not come from a wealthy background. He came from a family that did have to move around quite a lot because of their lack of funds. And I came from a very comfortable family, where in stereotypically it would have been the opposite, right? And so it's like you have to recognize that people can come from different situations than you realize. And like I said, it was just really interesting because we were faced with those conversations early on. Some of us of our own volition that we wanted to talk about, but a lot did come up over time because it's like, oh, this situation came up, oh, he did not grow up with his father. I did grow up with my father. In stereotype world, it would be the opposite. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, I understand that those microaggressions and things can come up, and they definitely did. Like we talked about a lot of things early on, but again, it's just your willingness to do that. Like, are you only with this person because of what they like what their exterior like means to you, right? Like I've had people say, even in my own family, that like, oh yeah, you're only with that person, to like, you know, gain some type of like, social hierarchy or whatever, like move up on the social ladder. And and again, like people are gonna have their opinion about anything, but like it just depends on what you're willing to like go through. And for me, I've never shied away from a discussion. And so like if that's what you really think, like sure, say it to me. We'll talk about it, I might change your mind, but you might have those views and like that's completely fine. But like if you know anything about my husband, like he's not, knocking down any doors in like, these like white bougie areas either. Like
Right. And I think
so
you both are willing to have a conversation. Like
yeah,
you two might be, one of the 4 in 10,
fair.
obviously. I mean,
Yeah.
you've just given us a ton of examples, but like I can see where people might not be comfortable having this conversation,
Hmm.
but I think you're right. Knowing you, knowing Ben, I know you guys would not be those people.
Right. Yeah.
All right. So, Tanika Smith, journalist, racial equality advocate, and author of Mixed Up Confessions of an Interracial Couple, says that being in an interracial couple myself, I felt there weren't many resources out there providing support on how to discuss race in a relationship. Each couple is different, but it's important to have these healthy discussions at an early stage, not just because of what's happening in the news, but ultimately to build an honest and supportive relationship with one another.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. I actually met somebody when I first moved to the East Coast. I met somebody through like a mutual friend, and they go to support groups for Black women in interracial relationships. And so I was
Oh,
super
okay.
intrigued. Oh, I'm sorry, what?
I was just like, oh, okay. I didn't know that was a thing. That's awesome.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of same. Yeah, kind of same. Like I didn't really know that that was out there. But I also just hadn't seeked it out. And so I thought that was super interesting. Needless to say, I didn't go because it was actually like a religious group. And I was like, oh, I
Mm,
probably won't, benefit from that as much. However, I will say that, yeah, those, resources are out there. But I do think, again, like I just always kind of go back to the fact that like I think it's just more important to be honest with yourself about what you are looking for, because I don't think that in my early dating days I was as cognizant as I am now and like self-aware as I am now, because there were a lot of things that were said on dates, and this wasn't just like dating apps, this was just like meeting people in general who were like potential dates or relationships. I just don't think I realized how much it was going to affect the way that we communicated. And I think had I been a little bit more honest with myself in the beginning, maybe those things would have went differently. Um, but like now, when we go out or when we go places or whatever, like it is always on, it's always going to be on my mind because it's a factor, right? It like, changes the way that we, navigate the world. But I do think it's super important to like, if you're open to dating anyone, if you are, right? Because everyone isn't. Like some people are like, no, like I wouldn't date outside of my race. And I'm like, okay, I mean, that's completely up to you. But
Hmm.
I think it's just important to let people tell you who they are, instead of like having these preconceived notions of like, well, he's this, meaning that he'll like this, and this, because it's like, one, unless you are just those things and that just comes naturally to you, that's a little bit odd to go into it like that. But I'll say the same thing. I've met, white women that date black guys, and, they do hypersexualize their mates. And there was actually like a TikTok trend going around not too long ago about like white women like showing their like interracial partner, and usually they were black men, and it was just this weird like trend that like was basically like showing who they were and giving their stats. And just again, like our history in this country, just given like what we used to literally sell human beings, and like the way that they were like showing it on social media, those are the times where it's like, yeah, you need to have those conversations early on. You need to be cognizant that like certain actions, although you may not mean them in a certain way, does have a historical context. And we have a weird pattern in this country of just like forgetting history and, deciding that like it doesn't matter. And when I go to other countries, I'll just give you this example. When me and Ben were in the UK, or no, I'm sorry, when we were in Germany, Ben was talking about something. I think we were passing the Anne Frank house, and he was saying something just to the extent of like, as far as like Nazism being on the rise and like neo-fascists being on the rise in different countries. I literally like told him, I was like, oh my God, don't say that so loud. And he was like, it's different here. He was like, Germany understands their history with the Holocaust. They do not try to hide it. Like people are very aware that Nazism was bad for this country and for the world, and that they do not want to repeat it. Like they don't, Germans aren't like walking around like, no, that wasn't that bad. Like, no, they wear it on their sleeve because they're very cognizant that like this is something that was really atrocious in our history. And to avoid repeating it, we need to be like upfront and honest about it.
Right. Acknowledging it.
Right.
Yeah.
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 So,
Oh, yeah. That's a good example.
yeah.
Yeah. People won't talk about it here.
Yeah, it's very odd.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
So she goes on to say, Tanika Smith, that the fact is that race is an integral part of our human identity. And if your relationship is going to work, then it's absolutely vital to understand each other's experience and point of view on all aspects of racism.
Mhm. Mhm.
So another person in this article was Dr. Reenie Singh. She's the founding director of the London Intercultural Couples Center, and she agrees. She says it's crucial these conversations are being had, and for white partners in interracial relationships to acknowledge their partner's experience of racism without dismissing or making excuses.
Mm.
So the article wraps up by saying the report's statistics paint a bleak picture. But Dr. Singh points out that interracial couples are some of the strongest because of the discrimination and obstacles they overcome together. She says, quote, they often end up being much more resourceful and resilient and loving and committed than a lot of other couples because they've had to cross this taboo, this barrier in order to be together.
Interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's super interesting. Yeah, I also think like I remember like one of my first therapy sessions talking about being in an interracial relationship in 2020 and like what that kind of looked like. And my therapist is black, she's a black woman, and I just remember telling her, like one of the hardest things when I was dating black men was, not just dating black men, but just like going on dates with black men specifically, was that they were under the assumption that I was just going to like subscribe to everything that black culture um entails in this country. and saying that like I would submit unto my man, which a lot of it is like tied to like religious stuff as well, but a lot of it is just cultural now, submitting to my man, and being the home taker, and having kids. And there were just a lot of these beliefs that are put on Black women, making sure that I was like always for the people, always for Black people. And I am for the liberation of all people, especially Black people. And in this country, I do think we need to put a focus on it. Um, but I also do recognize the fact that like I can still be my authentic self as a Black woman and be with someone, whoever that may be, whether they look like me or not. And it does not make our relationship less than or lacking in any way just because I'm not, just because I don't subscribe to those beliefs. And so I do remember like mentioning that in therapy, I was like, it's just really unfortunate because we're not allowed to show up as our full selves in a lot of relationships. And I think, unfortunately, seriously, unfortunately, before I say this, like a lot of men of color just haven't started that emotional journey that it takes to like be vulnerable. And it's not something that I say as like a dig at anyone. It's just something that is super unfortunate because everyone deserves to have that, emotional freedom and that
Mm-hmm.
the room to talk about that. And
Yeah.
just in my experience, that's not always the case with men of color because we have a lot of like ugly beliefs imposed on men in general. And of course, the first group that is going to be allowed to be more emotionally available is going to be white men because they have the space to do literally anything that they want to do. And it's not to say that they're all great either. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying that like there has been a lot of situations that, Black women that I know that are in relationships with Black men are just expected to accept things about them just because they're Black. Well, that's just the way that it's allowed to be in our culture. And I don't think that's acceptable for anyone to, put on anyone. So, yeah, to me it's like every relationship is going to have hardships and you just have to choose like which ones you're emotionally available and like wanting to dive into.
Yeah.
But I don't think that just because your partner looks like you, your relationship is going to be any easier because I haven't found that to be true in like
Right.
anybody's relationship.
Right. Yeah.
you know.
Right. Problems are everywhere. This is just one factor.
Right.
Could be
Yeah.
one factor.
Right. Exactly.
So, not to end on a bad note, we usually give you guys some tips, or I do some research like that, but like, I wanted to have this discussion and kind of examine what this looks like,
Mhm.
and Ryann being in an interracial relationship kind of gives us an inside point of view as well as the opportunity to dissect if these things are really true.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
know what I mean? And I
Yep.
think some of these things we can take away just in dating in general,
Mhm. Mhm.
but I think also having these apply to an interracial relationship might be helpful if someone is dating someone of a different race or different ethnicity or just different identifiers that might not,
Right.
right? Like it really covers the whole spectrum.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
So, so get out there and just meet people for who they are and be
Yeah.
yourself too. So you can find someone
Yeah.
who be your authentic self.
yeah, for sure. No, it's not
uh,
always the easiest. I mean, dating is tough for a lot of reasons. And I totally
yeah.
get when people are like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to get on the apps. I don't want to, meet people in that way. I get it. Like, I'm not knocking anyone because I think, unfortunately, like dating has changed in a lot of ways. But I do think that it's helped us in some ways to confront like our own biases and like the things that we do, the expectations that we do put on other groups of people. I think that it's helpful in that way, but I do completely understand the fact that like some people just aren't, you know, in that way wanting to have that be like a factor in their relationship, right? Because they want it to look a certain way. But that's the thing that I find a little bit more detrimental to relationships is that like on social media, where a lot of us spend a good amount of our time throughout the week and, it dictates what we do and where we go, places we eat, right? It dictates all of those things. I think, yeah, take it with a grain of salt, but also like recognize the fact that like hashtag relationship goals doesn't mean that it's going to be a goal for you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the way that other people dictate their lives and what they decide does not need to actually have a lasting effect on what you do or don't do in your life. You know what I mean? And like, as much as it's fun to watch other couples, play out their life and start their family and whatever that looks like for them, it might be entertainment, but like, just like when you're watching a sitcom, none of that should actually apply to what you're looking for in your own life. You know what I mean?
Right, right. That's true. Yeah. And I did do a little research. I didn't put too much here, but about interracial dating apps specifically. And
Mm,
a lot of the big ones came up. I think they're trying to be on the forefront. Like some specifically had sections regarding interracial dating. I don't know
mm,
if that's good or bad. Like,
mm,
I don't know if the algorithms are filtering out, like, okay, you're swiping on more white guys, so we're going to show you more white guys. Or, you
mm.
know what I mean? I don't know if it's more integrated in that way or if there's like a section where you can say like what you're looking for
Right.
specifically. Um,
Hmm.
Go ahead. Did you have a
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, even though like a lot of times when we talk about, yeah, how things are filtered or like algorithms, I mean, it's just important to remember like algorithms are made by human beings. You know what I mean? And so just like at the TSA check where black women's hair was getting flagged for needing to, check, and like it was a whole thing because like, the algorithm, it's just the algorithm, like it's not reading it correctly. Okay, because it's made by someone that probably doesn't have any experience with a hair type other than their own.
right?
And predominantly in this country, it's going to be a white man behind that computer screen that's creating the algorithm for what he is most experienced with, and or whatever biases he has himself. And so like I do think it's like an important point as well, because yeah, in the dating apps, like I do think it's very clear who is given priority. And I've heard this from male users as well as female users. Like white people are given the majority of preference. You know what I mean? And that's not by accident. It's not coincidental. But it doesn't mean you can't find someone of value within those groups. It just means that, again, like just being cognizant of it, like know the world that you live in, and navigate accordingly. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. There is one app that we can recommend you guys don't go on though, and I don't know if Ryan has heard of
ooh,
this yet. It's called The Right Stuff.
oh god.
Have you heard of it?
No, but
It is a
yeah.
right-wing conservative dating app. And if you guys have not seen the like advertisement for this on social media yet, I'm gonna send it to Ryan after this because it's so cringy.
Ugh,
It's so gross. They're like, pronouns, we don't need those here. There's only two types of people. Like, it's
yikes.
awful.
Yeah.
It's awful. Like,
Yeah,
ugh.
I
So,
know. But,
so,
misogyny affects everyone, including
mm,
men. It negatively impacts all of us, like living in a patriarchal white supremacist society. It affects all of us. And all I'll say is that I've never heard I've heard more white women complain about how misogynistic and stereotypical their partners are than any other group. Like I like that's just like my experience, being around women, being in clubs with women. Straight clubs have a huge amount of, sexual assault attached to them. We started going to clubs, and we predominantly go to gay clubs because they are much safer. They're much more of a good time. You don't have to worry about getting pulled into the bathroom with someone. You don't have to worry about, if you're stumbling out drunk, that somebody will try and attack you nearly as much at gay clubs. And I just think it's super interesting because we've always known that, right? Like that's just always
yeah,
been a part of like me and Morgan and our friend groups, like just like the way that we did things. We had way less fun when we went to straight clubs. And I think
yeah,
there's something to be said about that. The fact that I would rather go to a gay club and take a chance on some guy that might just be, a little bit curious about women instead of a straight dude tells you a lot about our culture. So,
yeah, yeah. Oh, yes. Good
yeah.
point. All right. So, big question. Are we doing this wrong?
Ooh, interesting. I'll say I've come a long way in accepting the fact that like, who I'm going to be with is who I'm going to be with.
Yeah.
I do think after I broke up with a toxic ex when I was younger, I was like, you know what, maybe I need to like find someone different, but the reality is like you're gonna love who you love, and if you're a believer of love is love and that's just like what it is, then you know that it takes no form. It is who it is, and who you end up with, I hope fulfills you in all ways, but hopefully it's not just because of what they look like.
Yeah. Yeah. Well
Yeah.
said.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Same. I'm not in a relationship at all, guys, and haven't been in many. So I don't know if I'm doing this wrong or not, but I am very open to just meeting someone who can meet me in all the ways that I want to be met.
Right.
So this really isn't a factor for me. But I mean, I'm saying this as a 31-year-old woman who has been through the world. You know what I mean? If
Mhm.
I was 18 growing, back and growing up where we grew up, very predominantly white, my
Mhm.
family's white, like I don't know if I would say the same things just
Mm.
without having, and not to say I just know where I'm coming from my life experience. Like
Mhm.
I have certain expectations of people because of the people that I care about in my life.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if I will not accept any kind of just intolerance
Mm.
in some things.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think that's a big one for me.
Ooh, yeah. That's fair.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's a good
All
point.
right. Thank you. Okay, well, that is it for this week, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out with us again. Don't forget to check out our bonus episodes. We have some amazing people and we have even more to come. So definitely check those out. We have all their information, links in the bio and on our Instagram. So you guys can, or not links in the bio, links in the show notes and on our Instagram. So if you guys want to connect with them, please do. They would love to hear from you. Otherwise, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Don't forget to check us out on YouTube for the visual conversation. Um, Again, Instagram, come hang out with us, chat at Rung the Podcast, and we will see you next time.
Yeah, sounds good. Bye.
Bye.